we're going to go ahead and move on to our last story, our main story. This one's really, really interesting. It's quite frightening, actually. I have a thing about, and I've mentioned this on other episodes, I have a thing about stuff being underneath me. I think that's the reason why UFOs don't scare me, because I don't find the sky necessarily spooky. I don't find UFOs or space aliens and stuff like that intrinsically scary. But it's funny because when I talk about aliens that come from Earth or in underground caves, it gets to me. And I think you might, if you're a long-time listener to the show, I think you might have picked up on that. When I'm like, Gray's coming from space. But then when I talk about Greys evolving from dolphins and being in tunnel systems, the tone of my voice was quite different in that episode versus how I talk about aliens in general. I don't like stuff underneath me. I don't like being on lakes. I don't like being in the ocean. And it always trips me out to think, I live between two volcanoes here in Hood River. There's Mount Adams on one side and there's Mount Hood on the other. And I think, a mile down, there's just rivers of hot lava. I mean, that might not actually be accurate, but it trips me out to think that there are caves underneath my feet. And it's even weirder when we start talking about civilizations. Imagine you spend your whole life walking on Earth, and 3 miles underneath you, there is... Well, we'll get to that. We're headed to Windgate Pass. And you know what? Let's see here. I don't think that Jason Jalopy can make it. Let's take the bunny buggy. It's not a weed whacker. That is our four-wheeling. It has machine guns on it. We got 250 caliber machine guns on the front of it. It's a buggy. Going over the dunes. It's they all have four wheels, but it's a four-wheel drive buggy for going over the sand dunes. War boys are chasing us, so we have to outrun the war boys. Mediocre! We hear him yell as we just kick dust in their face. Whenever we go anywhere where sand, if I remember, the war boys will show up and try to take us. Mediocre! But we outrun them. Okay, so anyways, we're going to Death Valley. Specifically, we're going to Windgate Pass. Now, Windgate Pass is an area of Death Valley. And there was a guy back in 1932, he was writing a book called Death Valley Men, which is actually quite evocative title and very self-explanatory. You know what you're going to get when you read the book. He's in Death Valley. He's talking to, like, the hardy people that survive. Not the hardy boys, the hardy men. He's talking to, like, people who've lived there their whole lives. They're all dusty and stuff like that. Just real, like, kind of land scrabble guys, if that's even a word or a phrase. And he meets up with these two dudes. And they go, do we have a story for you? And he's like, why'd you get that accent all of a sudden? And they're like, I don't know. They go, do we have a story for you? You let's have a couple rounds, because this is going to take a while. It's going to take a while, Mr. Lee. So they're at this saloon. They're the only saloon still standing in 1932. They're drinking this beer. And he goes, okay, here's the story. Me and my buddy were out at Windgate Pass a long time ago. Not super long ago, but, more recent. And the author's like, come on, okay, just get on with it. Okay. Let me drink my beer here real slowly. So me and my buddy were out there. We're goofing off. My buddy here, being the idiot that he is, falls down a mine shaft. And I have to rescue him. Now, it wasn't like I'm imagining it wasn't like a straight drop, but they had to go down to the bottom of this mine shaft to rescue his buddy. And they find what appears to be some sort of false wall. And so they start kind of digging around in there. Now, of course, at this point, you're probably thinking, this story's fake. This story's super fake. But don't say that yet. You can say that at other points. But, I guess these two characters are basically Laurel and Hardy. They're, like, falling down and they, like, awaken the mummy because they're moving rocks around. But anyway, so they move away. They get through this false wall type of thing. And what they see is a massive underground chamber. A city, really. But completely devoid of life. It's empty. Except for the 8-foot-tall mummies holding golden spears. So the two dudes, we'll call them Laurel and Hardy, because I have to determine them in some way. So Laurel's like, another fine one you got us into. That might be the worst Laurel impression ever. I'm so sorry. I apologize for that. Laurel and Hardy begin exploring this. It's quite tragic that I named them that, considering what's coming up. But Laurel and Hardy are beginning to explore this huge chamber. They find gold everywhere. there's a huge table that's flat, it's round, it's polished, and they're like, this looks like some sort of ceremonial chamber. This looks like it goes on forever. They begin exploring this whole area, finding massive gems. I thought one of the most interesting things they found was, and here's a quote, heavy stone wheelbarrows which were perfectly balanced and scientifically constructed so that a child could use them. Now, I understand in 1932, a wheelbarrow was probably the height of technology, and they're like, oh my god, this is the Lamborghini of wheelbarrows. This is the look at this. Look at this, Hardy. I can do anything. A child could use this. I don't think there's any way I could be impressed by a wheelbarrow today unless it was a hover barrel. If it had no wheels and just hovered around, that's it. But apparently these guys are super impressed by this wheelbarrow. Now, it's funny because they just walked by 8-foot-tall mummies. And they're like, whoa, look at those giant mummies. Dude, is that a wheelbarrow? But apparently it really excited them. One interesting thing about their story, too, is there's two ways to fake stuff. One is to be completely vague, and one is to be overly detailed. But one of the things they said was that when they got in, the place was illuminated because there was like lines of gas in the wall that illuminated the place. So it was like basically fluorescent light bulbs built into the cave walls. And you could see the gas swirl around in there. That's a very, very intricate lie. If this is fake, that's a very, very intricate fake for 1932. I mean, again, I would be, if I found an 8-foot-tall mummy, a wheelbarrow, and some gas in the wall, I think those would be my first two things to talk about, would be the mummy and the gas. But for some reason, they really like the wheelbarrow, but it just is a weird detail. It's a very, very weird detail to fake the lighting system. But again, someone could have said, well, was it dark in there? And they're like, no, there's gas in the wall. So you don't know. But they're telling Borkley these stories. They do the smart thing. They take a bunch of gold home. Now, they probably use their scientifically constructed wheelbarrow, but they take a bunch of gold home and a bunch of gems, and they say, well, we're going to go back there. We're going to get even more stuff. But conveniently, if they're lying, and tragically, if it's a truth, someone steals all the gold and all the gems. So now they have absolutely no proof. And there was a cloud burst over the area, which actually is like this massive amount of rain that can deform the terrain. Because it's just such a steady, harsh set of rain that comes out of nowhere. They said that a couple of the landmarks were destroyed. They couldn't show where it was again. Again, convenient if it's a lie. So they tell this story to Borkley, and he writes it in his book. But later on, not like later that day, but, at a later point in time, they contact Bork again, probably through like Telegram or something like that. I guess they had telephones in 1932. But they call him up, and they're like, hey, we're going back. We're going to go back to Windgate Pass, and we're going to find proof. And Borkley's like, oh, awesome, Never, people disappeared. The two, Laurel and Hardy, gone. No one ever saw them again once they set out to go find Windgate Pass again. Now, of course, it's Death Valley. They could honestly just die. Anything could happen. It was 1932. The bandits could have got him. War boys could have got him. They could have been out in the desert. Witness me! And then just got blown up. But the guys were never seen again. And they were real people. Because the rest of the book was real people. But now, you're like, Jason, okay, that's an interesting story. A couple of people said they found something in Windgate Pass. But someone else also found something in Windgate Pass. In 1946, this doctor shows up. And we have a name for this guy. Dr. F. Bruce Russell. And this is interesting because he goes, in 1931, I found a tunnel in Windgate Pass. Now, this guy is more known to history because it was a big hubbub. He says that he found a tunnel in Windgate Pass that led to an underground city full of 8-foot-tall mummies and gold everywhere and these huge like gold spears and everything like that. Pretty much the same story. He doesn't bring back proof. He comes back and says, we need to bring an expedition down there. I need to get investors, and we need to lead a team in there, and we're going to take all this gold, and we're going to explore this place. Now, it's possible that he heard the original story. He read Death Valley Men, and then just made it up that he personally went there. That's definitely possible. But he's saying he went there himself. He comes out, he tries to get investors. People were like, listen, we're not going to give you money to find gold until you bring us back some sort of evidence that this place actually exists. And really, he's like, in 1946, he's thinking, okay, I'll go. I found it once, I can find it again. I will go and I will prove to you that this place exists. Hold my beer. And that beer eventually got warm and evaporated because he was never seen again as well. So now we have 3 disappearances linked to the same place of people who went to a location, came back, told people they knew of it, and then went missing. With the doctor, they did find his car with a busted radiator in Death Valley, but his suitcase was in the back seat. And that's always been, people have thought, well, if he abandoned his car, you think he probably would have brought a suitcase? I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't want a suitcase walking around the desert, but they never found his body. But again, it's Death Valley. Is it possible that all 3 of these people just met their end in Death Valley? Or is it possible that there's something else going on, that somebody wanted to cover the story up? Now, you can go to Windgate Pass today if you're a member of the military. Because what happened was the U.S. government bought all the land around there. And now Windgate Pass, this entire area that supposedly has an entrance to this underground city full of 8-foot-tall mummies and untold riches, and wheelbarrow technology far beyond our own, it's now part of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. From what I understand, it's where they test weapons. So even the military officials don't want to go out there because the bomb's going to fall on them. But you can't go there. As a civilian, there's no way you can go there at all. Government controls it. Let's go ahead and take a look at another part of Death Valley. This place is known as Devil's Hole. And it's interesting, it's not the Devil's Hole. It's not devil''s hole. There's no ownership. It's just Devil's Hole, as in multiple devils, which is a weird name for it. Charles Manson was that kooky serial killer cult leader back in the 60s, if you're not familiar with the name. And they were the ones who murdered Sharon Tate in our previous episode. They didn't murder her during that episode, but that covered that story. Now, his plan was this. He was going to start a race war so that he was going to commit a bunch of crimes, blame it on black people. The white people would then attack the black people would fight back. And in the resulting race war, the world would be destroyed, and Charles Manson would reign supreme. What he expected the Asians and the Hispanic people to do, I have no idea. They're just sitting there watching it, and they're like, hey, you want to divide this up after these guys get done killing each other? They're like, yeah, that's a good idea. So, very, very short-sighted thinking, Charles Manson, and you're normally known for such lucid thoughts. To be able to survive Helter Skelter themselves, him and his group were going to go into an underground passage in Death Valley. It was underneath Devil's Hole, so you had to swim through the water, and when you get to the bottom, it opens up to this vast underground city. Now again, we're still in Death Valley. Now we have 2 accounts of underground cities in Death Valley. Well, 3, technically, because you had 2 guys with the first one. Now, of course, one of them is Charles Manson, so you can take it with a grain of salt, or a hit of acid, but he said that in this, whenever a civilization comes close to being destroyed, the tuned-in members, as he called them, of the tribes or the nation or whatever, would descend into Devil's Hole. So underneath the water, there's a land of, the rivers are of milk and honey, which is, as evocative as that might be, that's disgusting. I want you to take some honey and some milk and mix it together and tell me if you want that running down the river. It's all blah, 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 blah. And, big question, skim or whole milk, Charlie? What are we talking about here? But anyway, so milk and honey rivers, honey and milk rivers, whatever the phrasing is, a tree that has 12 types of fruit on it, 1 different fruit for each month. I'd rather take a scientifically constructed wheelbarrow than a tree that I'm like, man, I really want an apple, but it's June and apples aren't popping up until October, so whatever. I don't eat apples, actually, but it'd still frustrate me that I'd have to wait for something even if I didn't want it. So he told his followers, we're going to start this race war, we're going to go into this underground water pit, we're going to find this ancient civilization where people are still alive from thousands of years ago. It's just this beautiful, peaceful place. Now, his place was teeming with life as opposed to the dead city further off in Death Valley, but that was his plan. Now, obviously, it didn't work. They started Helter Skelter. It was a total failure. They all got arrested, and that was the end of it. But we still have the issue of Devil's Hole, which is a real place. You can visit it. It is a bottom. People don't know how deep it is. People have tried swimming to the bottom of it, and they've died. Because again, you're in Death Valley, it's not the most hospitable place, but it is out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knows how deep it is. But you can visit it. You can actually go to it, but the government bought it. The government owns it. You can't actually go up to the rim of Devil's Hole. There is a massive fence with barbed wire wrapped around it. The government bought it, and it's by the Death Valley State Park owns it. So you can go there and you can look at it. You can look at this hole of blue water in the middle of the desert. But you can't go in it. Can't test how deep it is. You can't do anything. Now, their reasoning is there is a type of pupfish, that it's the only place on Earth that these pupfish still exist, and these pupfish have been isolated from the rest of the world for 10,000 years. So they say it's a conservation thing, which is possible, but it's so weird. If one of those two places were purchased by the government and was inaccessible to people, I would be like, okay, but this other place you can visit. Like, yes, the pupfish, but you can go to Windgate Pass and you can look around for this spooky treasure. But both of them in the same area are both controlled by the government. They're inaccessible to civilians. What's down there? I'm not giving a lot of credence to Charlie Manson's stuff, but again, if he had placed that same legend in Eureka, California, or Baja, Mexico, the fact that they're both relatively in the same location, they both tell the same story. Now, of course, Charles Manson could have read Death Valley Men and got his information from that, but when the government buys property, just buys it full off, and makes it inaccessible to other people, it raises suspicions no matter where it's at. But the fact that they happen to purchase the legendary portals to the underworld in two different locations in the same geographical area, what's going on down there? We talked about that in the previous episode too, and I said I'd address it later, where is the government covering up the existence of previous civilizations? I want to believe no. I think that's a ridiculous conspiracy theory. There is a urban legend that the Smithsonian has been going around the world destroying proof of 8-foot-tall mummies. It's such a specific rumor, and I've always dismissed it. I've always thought that was completely ridiculous, that the Smithsonian would walk around with hammers and mallets, and they're just like, die, desiccated corpse! None of this ever happened. They're basically the men in bandages, where they go around and they erase people's memories if they ever see an 8-foot-tall mummy and destroy the evidence. But then I come across stuff like this, and it makes me go, maybe there's something to that ridiculous conspiracy theory. I don't believe that the Smithsonian is going around destroying 8-foot-tall mummies, but I'm a little more suspicious now. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.